So,
Can you see my screen, Kelly?
Yes, I can.
Great.
Just choosing not to look at it for this present moment.
It's okay. Well, I think we could probably just allow people to read that for a moment and then move on.
Well, it's your show, George.
Well, that must have hurt, Kelly.
You know I don't believe it. So I will welcome everyone to R-Spec today, and thank you for joining us and coming along. This year, for those who haven't come to any of the spec forums this year, we have changed it up a little bit and we have a different way of doing things, and I'll go through the agenda for you in a minute. For this forum and for the other forums, and we will be you'll be able to get 2 GCA CPD member points, 2 Surveyors Registration Board member points for Victoria, and 2 for WA General Education points. For the showcase, you will get 3 of each of those points. And for those who haven't registered the showcase yet, we do have some pretty awesome speakers coming up. So we've got Fanny Mallies from Smart Cities talking, Andrew Dale from Boost, not Boost Juice, Boost, he was talking about AI. Ryan McDonald, who's sent us a video for today, but will also do a presentation at the showcase. Johan Nell from Open Spatial, Bradley Rasmussen from Size Tech, who's going to be talking about forecasting growth using AI and predictive modelling, and Karis Evans will be talking about Digital Twin from Digital Twin Victoria. We'll be talking about their digital twin, and Eleanor Moyson is going to do a live demo of the digital twin. So it's going to be a pretty good showcase. So if you haven't registered for that, you should check it out and have a look. For today, if you could please keep your camera on and your phone on silent. So we prefer to have cameras on because we like to see who we're talking to, and it just makes it a bit more pleasant for the speakers. If you're dialing in by phone, can you, and you get a call, hang up your phone and answer your call, then dial back in. Otherwise, we get to hold music, which is a bit distracting. We have live Q&A throughout the whole event. So if you want to, you can put a question into the chat, or you can just unmute yourself and ask your question, and that's fine. Or you can put your digital hand up. And we also will be running live polling throughout the presentation. So if you see at the moment, we have a couple of live polls open, and we would like for you to please answer those. And as we present through the presentations, we'll ask you some more poll questions as well. In terms of the agenda, George, we have what's it? Oh, so this is the. I haven't got that slide in my copy, George. It's new.
Haven't you?
No,
yes. That's okay, Kelly. Just it's in. I removed one of the slides. I was just thought that we were doubling up, but basically in this session, the agenda is that we'll talk about what's going on right now with the specs, particularly as we've launched a new version. But essentially, some of the examples that I'll be showing are around interpretations and clarifications that we are continually asked about. Gabby will will provide some tech tips. We're having a bit of a challenge with getting Gabby online, so we'll keep you posted on that. We've got 2 community experiences where 2 people from our community will be sharing their experiences. One will be a live presentation. The other one is a video recorded message from Ryan McDonald from his company. He was so keen to do it and couldn't, due to work, he couldn't commit. So he's actually created a video of his presentation, which which goes for about 10 minutes, which I believe you're going to show Kelly. And then in the wrap up, we'll do, where to from now.
Sorry, and the live presentation is Jess Nauta from Spiire, and she's going to be talking as well. And then George will do his wrap up and plug the showcase again. And please, as I said, register for the showcase. And welcome, enjoy, and I'll hand you over to George.
Thanks, Kelly. And good morning, everyone. Thank you for making the time to come on board. And we know how precious your time is, so we've got a fairly jam-packed session this morning. So I'll just head straight into it. One of the things, so my previous slide, I mentioned that the specs were released on the 4th September. So as of last week, all of the new versions of the specs are now available through your login. If you haven't got a login, then I'll show you how you can get a login to the A-SPEC website a bit later on in the wrap up. One of the things that you'll find is that we have 2 versions of each specification. So this might be a bit confusing for some people who are not familiar with the specs. So I'll spend a little bit of time just talking about that. And as you can see, that both the specs are around the delivery of digital data. One is based on delivery of digital data for newly constructed or newly rehabilitated assets or renewals. And the other one is for projects where you might have a backlog data capture project, or you want to migrate your historical data into the new structure and you want to do some field capture. Now they are identical except for one aspect, which I'll show you. Now, if we look at the pathway table, then you can see that there's all of those attributes there, which you'll be familiar with if you've used R-Spec before. And so the only difference between this version for new assets and the version for existing assets is that we've looked at each asset attribute and categorized it according to whether it's a core requirement, whether it's an optional requirement, or a desired requirement, which is the YR. On this page, you can see that every attribute has a classification, and we use the optional and the core requirements here, just to give you an indication of it's really exactly the same. So it's a mirror version. What we've done is had a look at what is practical from a field perspective. If you go out and say, well, okay, what are the things that I can literally physically see when I'm out in the field? Now, some of those, now when it comes to a YR requirement, required and may need more research, what we're saying there is that you may not find any further detail, which is okay, in which case you use a default value. But in the event that you want to rummage through your historical plans, or you want to do some verification out in the field, then we've identified which attributes would be classified as YR. And if you're interested to find out a bit more, just put it into the chat, and I'll prepare something during the wrap up and show you a bit more detail about that. Now, at any time, as Kelly identified during the housekeeping, if you have a question, pop it into the chat. Kelly's monitoring the chat, and she'll notify me of when there's a question, and I'm happy to clarify it as we go along. So there's a lot of things that have been going on in the background, and and essentially what we look at doing is what else? Okay, so we've got the documents, that's fine. That's the manual of interpreting. If you see something in the field, what's it going to look like, and what is the expectation of the delivery in a digital structure. But we've also looked at updating the sample data. We have a number of spreadsheets. We have updated code list in the API application that Gabby has written. We've looked at reviewing other national and international initiatives in the context of how R-Spec fits into those. And of course, we've got ongoing input from users into the specs, and a lot of the examples that I'll show you today have come about from inquiries from the users. So I'll just talk a little bit about the sample data. So mid to end of next week, the new sample data will be available online. We posted it last week, and then one of our key users identified that we had some issues with it, so we've taken them all offline. I apologize for the inconvenience, but we thought it best just to defer that a little bit longer until we resolved it. But essentially, we have a spreadsheet which lists all of the changes per spec, per layer name, per table, and per attribute. So as you can see here, we've got an example of the changes that you can find in R-Spec, and you can see that the Area Works ID is the common one, which is in every asset table. And then we've got what attribute fields have been included per table and what attribute fields have been removed according to tables. So you can see there's a few changes. If you are interested in the spreadsheet, just put your name in the chat with the best contact number, and we'll send that to you, and let us know what you'd like us to do. Please send me spreadsheet or spreadsheet and your name and email address is fine, whatever is simpler. But aside from that, we've looked at, there's a couple of initiatives that are going around. One is VBIS, Virtual Building Information System, and the other one is Uniclass. Now, the way that they fit in is that VBIS is a Victorian initiative, and has been developed to assist the identification of assets from a built environment perspective for organizations that want to get their assets into their asset system. And the intention of this is to standardize the coding of different kinds of assets. Now, how this fits in with R-Spec in particular and A-SPEC overall is that both VBIS and Uniclass are classification systems, and Uniclass is an ISO standard. So Uniclass 2015, ISO certified, globally recognized standard, and it's also been recommended in the Victorian Digital Asset Strategy that for all the large builds that are occurring in Victoria, that they utilize Uniclass as part of their classification system to create interoperability, which is fine. Does it impact R-Spec? No, it doesn't. Because what we're looking at is how can we end up with R-Spec data, which is primarily focused around the asset management realm. And so we've done some mapping, and this is another table that potentially we're happy to provide if there is an interest to it. If you're looking at the links between Uniclass and VBIS and R-Spec. So you can see that there's a level of granularity in R-Spec that doesn't apply to Uniclass and VBIS, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that it's more appropriate. So, for example, it's more appropriate in R-Spec that we have a surface centerline, but it's not a built feature. So there's no Uniclass code and there's no VBIS code. So the way that we look at it is there's a level of granularity with R-Spec that's not really required in VBIS and Uniclass. So therefore, R-Spec is almost like an addendum or a companion to what these core classification systems are. And the same thing can be applied to industry foundation classes, to Omni class, the IFC, all sorts of other classification systems. So we're constantly monitoring this. Again, if you'd like to know more information, pop it into the chat and I'll address it for you. Due to the level of maturity, and I'm talking about the increase in maturity and the increase in sophistication at the asset owner level, we're now getting a lot more queries around the specs, and not just R-Spec, but across the board, and which is really pleasing because it really gives us an opportunity to see how appropriate the specifications are. So this next group of slides is all about answering queries that came in from the community. So I'll start with this one. Which assets do I capture? So I'll talk more about this under our governance section, but you may remember, if you've been at previous forums, that we've presented a checklist, and this year and also last year. So here's a snapshot of this. So what we suggest is that you start by looking at the checklist. So when I say strong recommendation, it's almost like if you really want to be clear about what is to be delivered and what you're going to receive, I can't stress strongly enough the importance of doing some kind of checklist. So we've prepared a checklist, and I'll give you a bit more detail into this, as I said, into the governance area. But as you can see on the screen, it's to create a communication between as I've listed there, surveyor to consultant and the asset owner, or the consultant with the asset owner, or the consultant with contractor. Whatever the relationship is that you're dealing with, it's a great way to address this. And Gabby and I do quite a bit of data capture for some of our clients. And we always use this checklist as a means to almost calibrate the thinking between what our client expects and to be captured and what we understand is needed to be captured. So thanks to the people that have put into the chat. The checklist, Brian, can be downloaded from the website, and I'll show you a bit more about that a bit later on. And the others that asked for the spreadsheet, yep, no problem. I'll send that through to you. Okay, so here's I showed this last week, but this is really really critical because of the impact of how R-Spec features will fit into an O-Spec environment. And I wanted to show this particularly for people who haven't attended any forums before. So I want to discuss with you the question. So the question is, we have a new feature in R-Spec called hard stand. So what is the difference between a hard stand and hard landscaping? Fairly valid point. Up until this version, we haven't had hard stand. So everything that has been related to some sort of solid feature like this has been captured as hard landscaping. Now, in this instance, in this park environment, you know, I'm interested in seeing what people think. So Kelly has put in a poll. Do you think it's a hard stand or hard landscaping? So, you know, I'll let you do that in the background and I'll keep talking about that. So a hard stand has been created to enable capture of areas that are used to store plant and equipment or heavy vehicles. Fundamentally, the construction is different and the attributes are different. And I want to show you that. So in this scenario, the answer to this question is, this is hard landscaping because of where it sits. However, if we move on to what is the difference between the attributes between hard landscaping and hard stand, if we have a look at these two tables, I've identified the common attributes in sort of a pale blue grey colour, depending on the image on your screen. The colours will vary, but the highlighted ones are the common attributes. And as you can see, there's quite a few more attributes in the hard stand area that relate to the construction of the material of the hard stand, you know, the weight bearing capacity of the hard stand, which is really important, whether it's been reinforced or not. Whereas in landscaping, there isn't that particular requirement, so there's far less attributes. So if this was to be captured in the previous example, if this was to be captured as landscaping, then you can see that you use this table on the right. If it was to be captured as hard stand, then, and you only captured as landscaping, then you could see that there's a lot of features there that are really critical to the maintenance of that area that need to be captured. Okay, so here's another example where we've been asked, so what do we do here? Do we do A or B? So the intention of pathways is that they are separated by segment for pram ramps or ramps. Part of the reason behind this came about from an inquiry a few years ago by a councillor to their asset management area of the location of ramps due to a customer complaint. They had a complaint where people found it difficult to access one side of the street to the other. And I think it was dealing with a person that had a particular mobility issue. So the importance here is that if the council wants to aggregate the polygons, that's okay. That's a council choice. What we're saying is A is the preferred and recommended approach. So that's what's specified in R-Spec. And then if B is required or requested by council, then it's a conversation that you need to deal with. So in the specification, we outline that here's the criteria for determining when a new polygon is created, where there is a change. And that's fairly consistent throughout R-Spec when we're talking about segmentation of paths or roads, etc. Now, there are challenges of segmentation, and my observation and experience in segmenting pathways is that it's the most challenging. Kelly?
There's a comment there from John Cleverton. Path ramps, different councils have different requirements on this. Some want ramps separate while others want them included.
Yep. Thanks, John. Our recommendation is that, look, we know that your organisation is capable of amalgamating them. No problem. If you want to do that, that's your choice, John. What we're suggesting is that the councils have subscribed to R-Spec. R-Spec has a particular structure for the data, and as identified in Part A. And so that's what can be expected by every council who subscribes, or every authority who subscribes to R-Spec. They know they're going to get the data in that part. If the council request it as per Part B, then you can do it, John. However, what I would suggest is that you have a conversation with the council to say, look, it's outside of the spec. It's going to take us an extra bit of processing to do it, and therefore there's going to be a charge for that. What I advise the councils is that if they want to do that.
Yeah, George, as far as processing time goes, it doesn't really matter that much between A or B.
Okay. So it's then a matter of whether different councils have different requirements, which is what your question is. So my suggestion would be to have a conversation with the council to see what they're prepared to do as a post-processing exercise. We advocate for A, the top diagram. It's your choice to do B, and then if you want to do that separately for every council, it's still your choice. We're advocating for A. Is there anything else that you want to say about that, John?
No, that's all.
Okay. Thanks for the question.
Sorry, George. Steve Elliott here.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
With A, why would you not split the through pass through as a pram ramp as well?
Up here.
Yes.
Look, I don't know if it's a pram ramp or not. This is just a general example. So,
okay.
So if it is a pram ramp, then yes, you would break it up.
No, that's all right. It's just a general question.
Yep.
Thank you.
No, look, no problem. And Duncan, thanks for the comment there. It's really relevant comment. Breaking it into the smallest practical components it's easy enough to stitch up. You can't disaggregate B, but you can aggregate A, and therefore it's easier for people dealing with the data at the user end to do what they need to do with their data. So thanks for highlighting that.
George, just wanted to ask just further on that, because one suggestion that's come through from our council is to essentially break the segments basically to your pram ramp section itself, as well as that backset section that you have to build behind your pram ramp to have the clearances for things like prams and wheelchairs and so forth. It does make it very data heavy because then you have those sections stored separately geospatially. But the intent would be is to have their attributes just part of the footpath. So just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Well, if you want to do an aggregation at your end, Renier, then go for it. You know, if we look at, Duncan Brooks is a supervising surveyor at consultancy SMEC. So they do a lot of this capture, and his comment about breaking it into the smallest components is a really important one, because then if you want to aggregate it at council level, you can. So for example, you can see in Part A that these are broken up, and down here they've been aggregated. That's a choice that can be made at the council end. What we're endeavouring to do is not have it that every council all of a sudden has their own requirements, and then it becomes R-Spec plus Council A and R-Spec plus Council B's addendum. We're starting to get away from the intention of the specifications, which is to standardise and normalise the requirements. Now, I don't know if I answered your question or not, Renier, but feel free to tell me if I didn't.
No, that's good. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Okay, so we know that, in my experience, segmenting pathways are often linked to roads, so historically. So, the roads they have a parent-child relationship and generally viewed from a database perspective. So I hear two schools of thoughts. Need to align to a road so we can find them. That's one school of thought. Another school of thought is, as long as it's recorded, we can find its location through the GIS. That's okay. We have no fixed view. What we've provided in the documents is some guidance around the segmentation. So you can see again with these footpaths, these pathways, we've segmented out this ramp area, and then there are 1, 2, 3, 4 segments along here. Now, initially we did this to reflect where the ownership of these pathways are, but at the end of the day, it's something that we haven't standardized because every organization wants their segmentation to reflect their asset management environment and their maintenance environment. So the main objective from an A-SPEC perspective is get the data to the door so that you can deal with the data the way that you need to deal with it within your own environment. That's the intention. There's other, of course, this also applies to roads, but, just how much do you need to do? So we see that there's joint responsibility here, and look, I can see both sides of the fence. On the one side, the asset owners saves them time. It's completely valid to have a requirement to do the segmentation as they need to do it. As I mentioned, I'm yet to see more than one council do the segmentation the same way. So there's a level of consistency there that's important. So ultimately, it's up to the consultant if they will take on the request or not, and whether they want to charge or not. So going back to John's question earlier about requests from councils, our position is that there's some post-processing that can be done. No problem. Let's be consistent with what the data is to be delivered. And that's the intention of the specs. And by following the specs, then everybody knows what they can expect. One of the things we also hear is that clearances and statements of compliance are being held up because a request to amalgamate segments or do segmentation of a particular way is not done to the satisfaction of the council. It's not something that GISA supports. We have no say in it, but it's not. We always advise the councils or the asset owner not to go down that path because there's ways around it. If anybody has a different experience around that, don't hesitate to share. Crossovers. This is This is a really interesting one because we showed some examples last year where we had private driveways going into a cul-de-sac that were not a council asset, but it was requested for them to be captured. So there's no problem about the capturing. We've got the we've got the tools within R-Spec to be able to capture these. You know, these crossovers are also called driveways in the spec. So, for example, what we look at is, okay, so is this a council asset? Typically, in my experience, it's not an asset, even though council provides the authority for how these driveways may be built and their maintenance and so on. Typically, they're not a council asset. So therefore, the focus, as shown in the R-Spec example in the bottom diagram, is the pale blue are the driveways. And we've got, I haven't segmented it here, but you've got the road, the seal, which is a council asset separate to the driveway. So in these instances with that diagram that we acquired from City of Wanneroo, where we've identified where the driveways are, the extent of the polygon would stop between the back of the curb and the edge of the footpath. And typically there's no attributes associated with them. So we've been getting a lot of, as I mentioned, we've been getting a lot of inquiries about the technical breakdown of assets, which I think is great because it's really showing, as I mentioned, the maturity level is increasing, and also the importance of the data for asset management decisions. Now, this one is around roundabouts and splitter islands. So the question came about is, well, there's two questions here. So roundabouts have a requirement for diameter. So how do we capture it is the question. So in this instance, as the infill is landscaped, it would be recorded as landscape and a landscape polygon also captured. So the splitter island and pathway pavements, sorry, I'll go back a step. So the diameter would be the overall diameter of the roundabout. That's what needs to be captured. But because there are two kinds of assets there, you've got the infill as well as the overall roundabout, then those two assets need to be captured there. And that's what's specified in R-Spec. If you look at figure 90 in the new specific or in the updated specification. And if we look at roundabouts and splitter islands, so we've got, what do we do in this instance? So we've got pavement that's underlying. We've got a pathway.
Sorry, George, there's some more comments in the chat from John around council requested concrete and exposed aggregate as to be shown as one polygon, and also agree with John, there's a lot of variation between council. That's difficult to predict and ultimately results in network and unhappy clients. Happy to keep a style guide to each council, but I'd like the councils to provide example data, ideally linked to their standard engineering drawings.
Yep, look, I think that's great feedback from both John and Jess, and I can see that Shane is also discovering it. So it's obviously a common thing that's going on. The first thing that I would do is start a conversation. If your client is the council directly, then start a conversation with the council, particularly with the asset management area. If your client is, if you're a surveyor and your client is the consulting engineering company or developer, then have them have that conversation or have them authorize you to have that conversation. It is difficult because there are so many variations. I'd love it that we would have a standardized way of segmenting things, but we're not there yet. So thanks for those examples. If there's any questions in there for me, don't hesitate to put them in. But just to complete on the roundabouts and splitter islands. So we've got, in this particular instance, as you can see, we've got a splitter island here in the median strip type area. So what I would see is that there's a number of assets that need to be captured. So you've got in this area here, there's likely to be the pavement underlying, and then that splitter island in the context of traffic management device. In this space here, where you can see the path splitting the splitter island, then we would see that there's pavement. There's some kind of pathway there, so the attributes for a pathway would be captured there, and then tactile ground surface indicators, as I've mentioned in here. So that's the way that we would see that piece would be broken up. What would be common would be the pavement underneath. And then for the surface area, which is built up on the pavement, as you're all aware. Okay, just moving away from diagrams for a moment. So conditional fields. There are conditional fields throughout R-Spec and throughout all of the documents. And these are becoming more common. And essentially, it's an if statement. If this situation exists, then do this. And as you can see with the unique ID, if the asset number is provided by the asset owner, then this is to be used. In some instances, it will lead to a default value, such as these two fields, street name and location, and they are connected. So it's either one or the other. That's what the condition is. If not in a street, then use the default. If in a street, then use the default for location. So it's important when populating this level of detail that it's not something that needs to be verified out in the field, but it can be done back in the office as you're processing your data. So the conditional statement is quite common. So there's two, so this is the last frequently asked question. Sorry, there's two last frequently asked questions. This is the first one. I've not been provided with some details. What do I do? Do I make assumptions, just use my defaults, or leave blank and hope it's not noticed? Well, the actual answer to that is none of the above. It's important, and we stipulate this whenever we're talking to consultants. It's important that you chase up with the lead consultant and request they provide the details. And I know it's easier said than done. However, the alternative is to provide defaults, knowing that the consultant, knowing that the council or asset owner reviewing it will say, well, hang on, you can't put the defaults in there, or you can't leave it blank because it's a brand new asset. So everything about that asset is known. So it will be incumbent upon whoever's doing this data collation to chase up with the lead consultant or the contractor to get the information they need. So question 2, which has been a bit of a theme about some of the questions that have come about so far. Again, the choice is the consultant's choice. This is a regular conversation that I have, and it's often prefaced by the asset owner has me over a barrel because they're holding up my clearance unless I do these extras. This is an education process. So it's about a conversation with the asset owner about why they are holding up clearance to this job when it's not actually part of the specs. So we would advocate C. And as previously identified, some of the consultants who have made comments, they're okay to do the work because it's not much post-processing, but it's about what is required. So that's one aspect. But the more important aspect that we see here is to have a conversation with them to say, well, it's outside of the spec. So therefore we've complied, but we understand that you have this need, we'll do it. It's then about your relationship with that organization as to whether they're going to give you the clearance until you do that extra work or not. And that's not something that we get involved with. That comes back to your own conversations and your own relationships that you built with the asset owner. Okay, so Gabby, I'm pinching some of your time, but everybody will get time back because I'll have a shorter wrap up time. But there's a few things that I wanted to cover off before we get into the tech talk. So the data model, I've shown this previously. If you'd like, if you're interested in seeing this, we're developing it for R-Spec. It hasn't been done yet, but we're developing it for all the specs just to show the relationship between the different tables. That's really all I want to say. If you're interested in it, yes, that would be great. And then just contact us. Then just contact us with your contact details so that we know to send it out to you, or put it into the chat. Actually, put it into the chat. That's easier. Now, governance. How do I record C comment? From the data provider end, what we're looking at is the C comment enables the data provider to submit their tables when features don't currently exist. No problem. That enables them to get through that validation area. When received by an asset owner, we request that we are contacted so that we know of any new features that are emerging that we need to create new codes or new features for. So we're not suggesting you use C comment, not at all. What we're suggesting is that the C comment identifies that there's something outside of the current code lists or outside of the features that are captured. And as soon as we're notified, then we can deal with it. So the asset and asset data handover checklist, I talked about this earlier. This is available on the A-SPEC website, and you can access this. You don't need, I don't think I put any login requirements for this, so you can log in and download it there. But the importance of this is that there's a part to sign off on from both parties, so that way it gives you something to deal with, and something around certainty around what you're going to receive. We've developed an asset and asset data handover guide. So it's basically, this is for the asset owners, and it outlines the requirements for the consultants to deliver A-SPEC data. You know, how to some step-by-step elements around how to communicate, where to find different bits of evidence, different bits of information, the preparation of the data, all of that sort of thing. Again, if you're interested, put your name into the chat, please, and we'll arrange to send that out to you And again, it also has the asset and asset data handover checklist. And in this particular instance, this was actually distributed as part of an RFT that went out, where we're currently dealing with the party that was engaged about how they are now to verify that the assets that were identified during preliminary design stage are actually going to be built or not, and whether there's others that haven't been identified. The quality report is really important. Essentially we're looking at creating confidence and certainty and remove the time and effort to verify what's changed. So again, this is built into the specs, as are the asset recording principles. So this is about recording the detail, recording the assets based on a particular precision. So each asset type in each spec has a horizontal precision code and a vertical precision code. And these are guides to say, here's what is expected to be delivered. Here's what's expected to be done to capture the data that is to be delivered to the asset owner. Certification form's been modified. I'm only bringing this up because we've included that there's a start date of observation, end date of observation. And for the experts in this meeting, they'll know that this relates to the Australian Terrestrial Reference Framework that need a start date and end date to determine what the variation will be. So now we're on to Digital Hive through Gabby Van Wyk. So Gabby is one of our partners and he's the lead in the Digital Hive business who will be delivering our tech talk today. Gabby, thank you. Thank you for allowing me to spend the extra time. Not that you had much choice, but don't rush. Take the time that you've been allocated for this, and I'll make sure that I'll take it off at the end.
All good, George. Not a problem. I'm just going to share my screen. Sorry, I didn't share the screen out. Right. And time screen. Okay. So Tech Talk, R-Spec. I'm going to start off with last year I spoke about the A-SPEC model that includes a lot of relationships between the R-Spec tables, and there's also some in that is not really R-Spec. And I'll just draw your attention to some of these things. I've got in here bioretention swales, and I'm saying something like the surfaces and the surface center line should never interact with a bioretention swale, and we can talk about that. But these relationships that I've got on here are the spatial relationships between different components of or classes within R-Spec. And I'm not going to go into the details of those, but what I want to talk to you about today is just some ideas of how you test for those, because each of these should be tested, and both council and consultants should consider adding the tests for each of these relationships within their process. So one of the first ones that I'd like to draw your attention to is attribute relationships. So these two types of attribute relationships, and these are all embedded in the documents, and the relationships that George was talking about earlier on will highlight these sorts of things. The one type is a one-to-many relationship, and the other is a one-to-one relationship. And what I'm sharing here today is just one of the ways. There are different ways, but this is one of the ways in which you can go and test using SQL in a product like QGIS, using the SQL to go and test for those kinds of relationships. And the two that I'm going to be talking about is a surface. The surface unique ID has to be captured in the parking seal ID, and that's a one-to-many relationship. But then the pathway unique ID and the pathway the pathway centerline path ID, that's a one-to-one relationship. And the same with the surface and the surface centerline. So now I had some issues with my previous tech talk in terms of just me making silly mistakes and forgetting a step. So today I'm going to try and do it in a different way. Oh, sorry, I forgot to talk about this little slide. The types of relationships that you can find, spatial relationship that you can find in A-SPEC are inside, disjoint, cover, and touch. And all of those, these tools, different types of tools and different approaches for each of those. And I'm just going to show you some of those. So what I'm going to do today is I've got a little bit of a screen capture video that I'll play for each of these, and I'll talk through that. So the first one or first example is something like to find all the records where the seal ID is not the same as the unique ID of the surface seal within which it is located. And I've written out the SQL statement over here. You can go and look at the recording, and if you take that as a principle and apply it, you can adjust that. And if you apply it, you'll easily be able to go and apply it to some other relationships like that. So here, playing my little video, and you're just going to zoom to the surface now. So this is an example. So I've got parking and I've got surfaces, and I want to look at the relationship between the two. What I have to start off with is just make sure, and this is just something that I always say, make sure that I work in a geo package, and that I always know which geo package I work in. And then I go into the database manager and I go and open that geo package, make sure that, again, make sure that it's the same one. I'm not using something different. And then go and open the SQL window within that. Now I've stored the SQL statement that I want us to work with. So I've just loaded that and executed that. And there it is. It's telling me that there's only one record. There's one of those records where it's not the same. So I can now go and find that record. Again, there's different ways in which you can find it. I'll just sort by the seal ID or the unique ID, I mean. I've looked at what that record is, the number, and zoom to it, and so the system zooms to the record, and if I query the seal, I see the seal ID is S1, and if I query that parking area, then I'll see that that's actually captured as S5. And I can go and clean that up, fix it up, and my video is too slow. Save it and go back. I'll just advance a little bit. So what I'm doing now is just reading it. Just rerun the same test and see how I go. And this time I'm getting no results, which means that I've solved the problem. I'll just stop right there and enjoy your attention. What I've done there is just remove that. In SQL, you have exclamation mark equals is not equal to. So I've just removed that exclamation mark, and I'm going to run it again. And now I should actually get all the records. And what I sometimes do with that is I go and do a count to make sure that I've covered all on everything, and that there's no problems any further. And I think that's it for this slide. I'll move on to the next one. So in the next one, I want to find all the records where the seal ID is not the same as the unique ID of the surface seal within which it is located. So the first one I talked about parkings and seals. This time I'm talking about the seal ID and the surface seal centerline. Okay, so let that run. Same sort of well, the same data set, and this time I'm just going to be working with different data. Sorry, I am still talking about the parking. I'll just. Am I playing the same video? Apologies, I am. How do I get to the next one? Right. Just going to make sure I've got the right one. Okay. Apologies. This time I want to ensure that the pathway has a center line, and every center line has a pathway, as I was explaining earlier on. So here's the sequel, and I've highlighted different parts of the sequel just in different colors to illustrate certain parts of it. And when you look at the video, then go and look at the highlighted bits, and that'll just help you to interpret what's been said there. So I'll move on. So this time I'm looking at pathways and the pathways.
Gabby, sorry, just a quick question. Why both IDs the same?
In the pathway, the pathway ID or the unique ID of the pathway has to relate, according to the spec, has to relate to the surface center line path ID. So it's not the unique ID of the path, but it's the path ID which has to relate. It's got to be the same because it tells me that. So that's the one-to-one relationship between the pathway and the pathway center line. So the pathway has a unique ID that's called the unique ID, but it has another field called path ID, and that path ID has to be the same as the pathway unique ID. So I hope I answered that question. Okay. Just so just running that little video again. Having a look at the attributes. So there's the unique ID, that's the path ID, that's the stuff that I want to query. And so I go back to the database manager. Again, make sure that that I'm using the correct data. And I'll just quickly load the pre-created SQL statements. I'll run that first one, and there's the results. And what this tells me is just a count. So I'll just pause there and explain a little bit. What I'm doing here is I'm counting the number of path IDs in relation to the so how many times does a particular path ID occur? Because it should only occur once. And go through, and if you look at the record number 44, I find there's 2. The second part of this query is just making it easier. I'm just extracting, and the method that I'm using is, if you follow that, it will help you to extract just the one record that fails that little test. So and if you run it, you'll find, well, there it is, it's the number. So for path 46, there's a count of 2, and I'm expecting to only have 1. And so now I can go back and I can go and find the record and fix it. So it's going to load the attributes. and look for that particular record, sort the path IDs. I could have searched for it. I just thought it would be easier in here to show you. And there you can see rows 44 and 45 have got the same path ID. So let's zoom to those. So that's the first one, and zoom to the next one. And so you can see that they're both next to each other. So when we captured this data, the person that captured the data must have made a mistake. So if I query each of those, so that one is, oh, by the way, I'll just pause here for a minute. The text that you see on the screen here, that text is actually just the ID of the pathway. And so the pathway 47, so each of those center lines should read the same as what's as the text that's being displayed. So I'll just look at that one again. So that one is a right. Query the number 47, and that's pathway 46. So we know that that's incorrect, and that's what we need to go and fix. So you don't need to talk about that. So that's the first part of that test, and I did all of that just using SQL, extracted and understand first of all how those different data sets have to relate to one another, and then find some method to automate that test. Now that the automation of that is probably the key, because I can write that script once and then I go and run it again and again every time I have another data set like that. Looking at the second part, I'll just on that. Let's skip a little bit forward. So the second part of this has to do with whether all of the records have actually got a center line. So what I want to do there is to see whether there's any center lines that's missing. Not center lines, path IDs, whether there's any path IDs that's missing. So again, going to the SQL, and now look at that second statement. Sorry, I'm playing the wrong video again. How I'm doing that, but come on. Sorry, what the thing I'd like to show on this particular one is, just zooming back, is a scenario where for every seal, if I don't have the seal ID associated with the parking polygon, is there a way in which I can automatically add that parking seal? So looking at the data, so basically each of these seals are parking polygons. I need to try and capture the ID of the seal within which that polygon resides, and I do that by, I'll just skip forward a little bit. There's a tool, the join attributes by location, and what I do in that tool is I use parking as the class I want to join stuff to, and I'll just have to skip a little bit forward, play a little bit, just get to the right one, and then switch it to the surface. So I want to take items from parking and I want to update those with something from surface where, and I specify that the relationship is a within relationship. So where they're within, then I want to specify a particular ID. So I've taken the unique identifier and I'm just adding a prefix so I know exactly what I'm talking about. I'll just pause that before it runs. I'll just explain that again. So I'm taking the parking. I'm looking where are they, within which surface polygons are each of the parking polygons. And then I'm going to add the unique ID to that parking. All right. And that's what I can do with that little tool.
Excuse me, Gabby.
Yep.
Is the pathway
Yep.
lines, intersect, or is it stop it at end of each polygon?
That will be answered in a little while. So it's a good question. Just going to pause there quickly. So I run the thing. So what you see here is the joint layer, but it's all the parking areas. But within each parking, I can see where the seal ID is, or I can see that seal ID that it is within. And then I can use my calculator, and I can just go and say update an existing, update the seal ID using the path of the unique ID that comes from the seal underscore unique ID. All right. And that'll update it. So coming to that question that was asked just now, I'll just jump a little bit forward because this is getting a little bit right at the bottom. It also tells you can see that I've got some blanks here, and so some of them were not updated, and so I might find, I might go and look why did that happen? Why was it not updated? Jump a little bit forward. So I'll go and I'll zoom to that one, find it, zoom to it, and you can see that what happened is there is that particular parking polygon was not completely within the seal, so it overlapped. It was a mistake within the data, and I'm going to show you that. You know how to do that. You can fix that data, and then leave it at that. So that's just updating, doing a spatial update, making sure that those identifiers are okay. Now, Kelly, before I jump on to the next one, how much time have I got?
2 minutes.
Okay. All right. The last one is just finding relational errors. I'll just talk you through those. So sometimes there's topological issues that occur within our data. Topological issues is just overlaps and where two things have a relationship with one another that they shouldn't have. There is a topological checker in QGIS. I'll just zoom back a little bit so you can see what the icon looks like. I don't know, where's that icon? In my video. See, now I'm trying to do it with the videos. There you go. There's the topology checker. So first of all, you've got to go and set up your rules for that topology. And basically it's what I'm doing here is I'm saying pathways should not overlap. And I add that. So one pathway shouldn't overlap another pathway. But I also don't want the pathways to overlap with surfaces. Right. And I'll just pause the video and jump to the result. Because if you then run it, you jump to the result, and what it does, it'll do these sorts of things. And I can see there's an overlap over here. There's another overlap there. There's also something going on here. I know what it is. There's a duplicate vertex at that point. But the interesting thing is that it gives you all these errors. So it tells me that there's overlap over overlap, and there's an intersecting geometry. That one intersects itself, which is in itself a problem. And I'll stop there. I hope that was of insight. And I'll hand over to you, Kelly.
You're on mute, Kelly.
Thanks, Gabby. It might be good for you to also check out the chat. And thank you very much for that really great tech presentation. So I'm going to play now Ryan's video. Give me 1 second. Had it up all the time. Okay. Share. Like. Thank you. Can you see my screen?
All right, hello everyone.
Yep,
Into
can see it.
the online forum for A-SPEC. Sadly, I can't be there today. Needed elsewhere. My name's Ryan from JBA Surveys. And I'm going to do a little workflow video for you guys on how we would process an R-Spec job. I was told to do some PowerPoint slides, but I think it's much more apt if you see what I'm actually doing. Okay, so this is a job, an R-Spec job we have in City of Perth for Rose Street. And I'm using QGIS because it's free, has a lot of functionality that I find very handy, useful, good for data integrity. And at the end, I'll mention something else that I'm looking at that's related to QGIS to hopefully make it even faster and cut out a lot of steps that you'll see. All right, so to start a job like this, I would get the surveyor to go out, pick up all the geometry for me, take photos if necessary for the layer, and also help me identify a primary key if it's required. So they'll number the curves for me so that I can link the photos easily. For example, once our surveyor's got everything that we want, they'll get the geometry correct for me. There's only lines, points, and polygons. So I'll make sure we get a drawing file that looks something like this. We bring this in from our survey package and we make sure these shapes, lines and points, are all compliant and make sense. Got our curves, just turn a few on and off. And we get everything in this drawing file ready to go, because this is what I want to import into QGIS and attach the A-SPEC attribute data, R-SPEC in this situation. So this is all the shapes that we got after our surveyor's done everything. It's also given me the photos in a separate file. What I do then is I'm using geo packages within QGIS. This is my way of keeping the templates of A-SPEC as stringent as possible. I've set these up to have default values. I try to make sure they're always up to date as well. And when I start a new job, I'll be copying this geo package template into the job, calling it something else to make sure I'm not messing with my template. Yeah, so each one of these will have defaults and also, for example, combo boxes and things filled out automatically. This is so that it just makes it as easy as possible when filling it out, and we're not going to put in anything that's not required. Incorrect, I should say. It's for data integrity. So these are all from the specs, and if I get these right once, it should be it. We have one spatial also doing GDV hub. I think I'll mention that now. That helps check R-Spec data at the moment for inconsistencies. This is going to be great for me to run through templates, so I'll be able to figure out where there's errors, update my templates, and hopefully have no errors ever again. That's my goal. So once I get these layers in for the job, they'll be in here. They'll have a style. They'll have a few other things, like the defaults I said before, and all their attributes lined up, ready to go. But there'll be nothing in there, obviously. And this is where I'd have to bring in this drawing file that the surveyor's made for me. And I do that in QGIS here, just under import DWG. Target package doesn't matter, I just choose temp. MGA zone 50 using for this job. And I'm going to import, just on my second screen, the drawing file. All right, cool. Some of these layers aren't required. Ideally, I'd have these labeled what they're supposed to be in the R-Spec as well, but it doesn't really matter because temporarily this is what we need. Call it drawing file. Now I've imported that drawing file. This drawing file's job is just to have the geometry for me. So for example, in curves, we'll see these. I'll just turn off everything else. We've imported. So we've got the curves here. Some are lines because there's just one segment, and some are polylines because they have multiple segments. Both just lines in GIS, so that's okay. What I would do then is if I wanted to bring them onto my R-Spec layer, say curves, make the layer editable, make these layers editable as well. Just do a nice big selection box. Should hopefully get everything I need. Just the line work. These points are attached as well because just from our survey work, there's points on the ends of them. Not required for this though. So you can just, it's good that it categorizes these quite nicely. Just grab the curves. What have we got here? Can make it editable, apparently. Paste. So 46 features were pasted in there. When we paste in these, you'll see lots of my defaults come through. So these are the ones that I just pasted. The correct ones are above. I'm obviously not going to save this file. So defaults on this one are length, for example. It's reading the length of these lines for me automatically and filling them out. And I've put mandatory in these ones, which we must fill out as the surveyor to help people out. And anything that can be filled out automatically or has a good default that makes sense. For example, this is reading the job file name and a few other things. That'll be filled out here. And then hopefully there's not as much data entry required. You can also do multiples at a time with this and fill out all of these if that was the case. So once we've done that, we do this for each layer. It's gonna not save this. And that would be our R-Spec job. Now, there's quite a lot of data entry going on here, which I don't like, and also room for error, just bringing this from the drawing file, etc., and a few other things. But what I believe in future we can do will be use this Q field. We can have this on our phone and have those geo-package template layers I showed before on the surveyor's phone or tablet, sorry. And then out in the field, they'll be able to edit and add geometry, point, line, and polygons, and connect their GNSS receivers to this and do it in real time. So my goal then would be the surveyor would have the templates, know what they're filling out, fill out as much as they can in the field. They'll also be able to attach a photo to it, as long as their phone or tablet has that capability. And when it comes into here, it'll come straight back into QGIS. Q field is linked to it, so it can come straight back in. It can also be on the cloud as well, so they can do it in the field and the person in the office can see it in real time. It's just going to skip the steps of them having to make these shapes, make sure they're correct. They can do it out in the field where they can see everything a lot easier. And it'll have the data attached to it already, and it's going to skip this step of me bringing in the drawing file and copying and pasting it onto a layer with some fields. And it'll also have the benefit of them having filled out a lot of it while they're out there. It's a lot easier. So I'm hoping in future that'll save a lot of time and end us up with something like this. If anyone has any questions, you can email me at ryan@jbasurveys.com.au. Sadly, I'm obviously not there to answer questions, but I hope that this was informative to some people. Thank you.
Great. So that was Ryan's presentation. And I'm just launching his poll to get your comments and feedback, or get your sort of rating on that presentation. I thought it was pretty good, but obviously it's your opinion that we're after. So please, please fill out those polls that we set up after each presentation, so that we can keep track of how our speakers are going and pass feedback on to them. So our next speaker is Jess Nauta, and I'm going to hand over to you, Jess. If you want to just share your screen and do your presentation, that would be great.
Sure. There we go. Hello, everyone. I thought I'd talk about some of the sort of challenges that we've had with R-Spec over the years. I've probably been working on it for something like 5 or 6 years, but Spiire in Melbourne has been working on it, I imagine, since fairly early, something like 8 years, something like that. I had a look at how much we did last year. Just in our Melbourne office, we did at least 80 stages of R-Spec on a lot of the new housing developments, mostly in the growth areas of Melbourne, primarily for Wyndham, Melton, Whittlesea, Hume, Cardinia, Casey. And the way we do it is actually quite similar to Ryan's method that he just showed. We use a mix of kind of field verification techniques, whether it be sort of traditional total station or GPS field survey, UAV, flights and photography. And same as Ryan, we're using AutoCAD Civil 3D and QGIS to process it. We've had different softwares in the past. We've had FME at one point, and we've had ArcMap, but this is our current setup. And we're mostly using sort of email submissions as shape files. We've done a little bit of ACDC, and yeah, we've sort of struggled with that a little bit because it's got quite strict sort of rules to pass that don't necessarily match up with some of the other councils. And yeah, our typical process, very similar to Ryan's, is we prepare our R-Spec data in advance because we're working on these big stages for developers. They're really keen on getting what's in Melbourne, it's called statement of compliance for their stages. And we need to have that R-Spec data submitted. And we don't want to submit it until it's obviously 100% built. And the last things to be built on these stages are, putting in speed sign, like road signs and line marking. And our developers and engineers want us to submit that R-Spec data often on the same day, the next day, something like that. So that's probably our major challenge. So we're drafting it up in advance as a design R-Spec, and then we're verifying it on site, taking photos. And then we're updating the R-Spec to sort of an ASCON version of that and doing a QA and submission. That last bit, we're probably trying to do those last 2 steps in a couple of days. So that's one of our major challenges. And over the years, I've come from a bit of a GIS background. At uni, I was always interested in GIS. And I found the major challenge is GIS skills for our survey staff, who are traditionally AutoCAD experts, but they just don't have that much background in the attributing and being consistent with using GIS rules and stuff like that. So typically when I'm teaching someone, one of the first kind of things that I get is something like this, where they've attributed it in Civil 3D and sort of haven't been able to understand what that attribute table is and just type something in. And that's it's quite a big learning curve because R-Spec is a bit of a beast. There's a lot to it, a lot of stuff that you have to learn. And then there's also the training with the engineering plans. They're really quite complex plans. There's a typical small stage of, say, 30 lots, something like that. It'll have a 30-page plan that goes with it that's very intimidating to young survey staff that are just coming into the business. It's, yeah, big learning curve for that. And then you get the electrical plans that go with that, and they're another beast on top of that. Very difficult to read, really intimidating. Then there's also the challenge of how do we create this? And we've had a couple of different goes over the years at different methods. Previously, we were producing it fully in AutoCAD Civil 3D using object data, but we found that had few limitations, was too slow. And to automate it, we were having to do manual programming, which was something that our business just wants to move away from. Too difficult to update, maintain. So yeah, we've tried to chuck all that out. But we've also found the challenge of R-Spec just involves those different steps, which are really suited to different sorts of programs. So your drawing and the drawing your shapes, that's really suited to CAD, whereas attributing things, well, there's a bit of QGIS in there and there's a bit of CAD. Then sort of adjusting things to where they're actually built. QGIS is okay for that. But I find once you're kind of editing complex polygons, stuff like that, I find it much easier to use CAD. There might be some really good GIS people out there who get really good at doing that in GIS, but I've just found the tools just aren't quite as good. But then it comes over to, say, calculating attributes. So doing something like a spatial join or adding a unique ID, something like that. It's just silly I feel like it's silly to write that in CAD, try and produce that. So we're doing all of that in GIS. And then the validating step, that's obviously better to validate it and, QA it in its actual, in the actual submission format, so like a shapefile. So we're doing that in QGIS. Then I suppose the challenge of that is that you've got two separate pieces of software. You really don't want to go backwards and forwards between the two. You really want to try and stay in one package. So that really is a challenge for training, teaching people two packages. And then on top of that, you've got all the other kind of software that we're using for survey, processing, UAV image processing, stuff like that. So it really is, like a lot of things that we're doing, jumping between different bits of software. So we really haven't sold that into one package yet, and we probably won't, but it would be nice to. Yeah, like I said, we've removed pretty much all of our rigid, hard-coded programming in CAD that we were using for R-Spec, and we've replaced that with really kind of freely available or simple kind of CAD tools and models that we've created in QGIS. So I suppose the important part about the models that I've found is that I'm also training the users on how they work and how they update them, because we really want to make sure that we're not just having one person in our business that knows how these things work, because once people are on leave, people leave, leave the business, it then becomes, a monster to kind of maintain and get somebody else up to speed on. So yeah, there's a challenge there of wanting to keep things reasonably simple. This example here is actually a lot like the example shown by Gabby and George, where you've got kind of complexities going on with how the interpretation of the specs. And this is kind of one of our bigger challenges, to kind of keep track of what each council would like, and then train train like my drafters on how to actually draw it that way. So I think this is kind of a good example, this roundabout, because there's heaps going on there. So this line coming down here, that's our tidal boundary for our road reserve. So I am really reticent to break my features along here because it's the middle of the roundabout. It just doesn't seem to make sense. Very few councils I've actually found really want it like that. So here I've broken my surface and my pavement just here. And with my center lines, I've actually continued them through. So I'm not even sure whose specs this kind of matches, but it made more sense to do it that way. Then I've shown the roundabout that way. Is this really, it's hard to know if this is the right way to do it. There's sort of some complexity in the specifications about if I've done it right. Even looking back on it, I'm not even sure that I have. But this one got through. And so, yeah, here's the same example that George showed with the roundabout. Do we want multiple curbs there, or are we just showing it in the attributes of the traffic management device? And same here with this sort of, is this a speed bump or is this a raised pavement? It's got sort of, the intention of it is to be able to sort of, for the footpath to cross the road there. So I went raised pavement. So yeah, these sorts of things are all the kind of choices that you're making as you're drafting R-Spec. And sometimes it's just on a wing to prayer if the council will actually want it that way. And really, we're just kind of relying on feedback to know if that's how you all want it. And a lot of the time, we don't get a lot of feedback unless it's really, really wrong. Because this is kind of one of those examples where it's it's the major complexity of R-Spec is that things are built in real life that don't necessarily match up with specifications. Here we've got a road sign that has 3 separate signs on it. So 4 separate signs, a couple of poles. It's the road reserve that's there at the moment. It's actually called Bint's Road. That will be closed. And then a new road is being created through there. It's quite challenging to know what we should put on that as how to attribute that thing. But yeah, nevertheless, I ended up showing this as 2 separate signs because that's how it was showed on the engineering plans. Whether or not that's right or wrong, you're not really sure. But yeah, you're just making these choices along the way. And that was sort of the main parts I had in my presentation about the kind of complexities of R-Spec. It's really difficult to always match up specifications with what's there in real life. And yeah, there's the challenge of kind of getting surveyors to sort of understand GIS when they're really not GIS people from a GIS background. That's our major challenge. So thanks everyone. Thanks for all the other great presentations. I noticed someone put their hand up just then.
No, it was a thumbs up, Jess. So the crowd like your presentation. So feel free, everyone, to put your reactions in. We are remote and online, so it's good to use those clapping and thumbs up emotions whenever you feel the need to congratulate someone on a good presentation. So thanks, Jess. And I'm going to hand you back to George. Can you, going to hand you back to George. Thanks, Jess.
I can do that. Thanks, Jess. That was really great. And believe it or not, everyone, neither Jess, Gabby or I spoke about roundabouts. We just happened to pick on something that was fairly complex and topical. But Jess, a couple of things that I noted. The way that you identified the centre lines was perfect. And in fact, it stipulates how to, in the spec, if you have a look, it'll show what extent you take those center lines through to. So if you have any questions, just come back to me on that. But yeah, I'd love to actually be able to use your example in one of our documents at some point, if that's okay. And the other thing about signs is that from the image that you showed, that looked like those street signs didn't look to be owned assets. So from an A-SPEC perspective, they wouldn't need to be captured. So I think they're probably owned by Vic Roads or the like, but I'm not sure about that. But
we were building them with our stage, so I think they did need to be shown in that case, but it was still complex.
Yeah, it is. But happy to have a chat offline with you and go through some of the things that you've identified, because look, the whole idea of having people like yourself and Shane Sewell and Ryan and others present is that it creates some robustness around whether the specs are appropriate or not. So it's one thing to put something on a bit of paper, as you've identified. It's another thing for it to be in the real world to see how it relates. So always looking at improvements that we can make. So now we know who you are and what you're capable of doing. We'll be coming to you more often.
Thanks.
Okay. So now can everybody see can you see my screen, Kelly, the wrap up?
Yep.
Great, thanks. All right, so as I mentioned, the release date's 4th September. All the relevant documents have been moved from a proposed section to the download area. So this is what it's going to look like. So when you go onto our website, if you don't have a login at the moment and you'd like to, whether council, consultant, doesn't matter, complete this contact form just by clicking on it next to the search box, fill the form in. This will come to our office, and then you'll probably hear from Melissa from our office about giving you a login or the process to complete a non-disclosure agreement form prior to giving you access. That's more so with consultants and contractors than it is for councils and authorities, because they still need to sign the form, but I generally deal with that directly. Now, when it comes to accessing the specs, using your login, when you log in, you'll come to this page. And over here on the right, click on specifications to download the A-SPEC specifications. So if you are, so depending what access you're being given, you'll be able to come to this page and download the relevant documents. Now, for people requesting access to the, where is it? Access to the harmonized code list or the overview document, you can download it from here. We talk about the sample data, and as I said, in here, it's coming shortly. If there's an urgent requirement, please contact us and we will deal with that. And as you can see, all of the different specs are there, and you can download what you need to download. And again, the asset and asset data handover checklist. So you can download these directly from the website. You don't need a login for those. So there's a PDF version and a Word version. That's just the checklist. So feel free to do that. For people who have requested the consultant guide, I will send that out to you from the emails that you've put into the chat box today. So that's essentially where you can find the documents. Yep, just showed you that. Okay, now we talked about a new specification, and that we're trying to make these specifications sexy. It's easier said than done, so using a name like A-SPEC is more about having a little bit of fun around what is essentially a pretty dry topic. So the D-SPEC, R-SPEC, they're fairly straightforward what they relate to. A-SPEC is really a name that we just want to have a little bit of fun with, and to have more community engagement around the choosing of that name. That aside, there's 3 examples that we're looking at including in A-SPEC, and the purpose of A-SPEC is to find asset classes, or to include asset classes that don't necessarily fit into any of the current specifications. This one about EV charging stations is probably on the border of actually being part of R-SPEC, in the parking area. So, but at this point, we're looking at the kind of attributes that we need to collect to identify the different kinds of charging stations and their location. But more than likely, this will sit in R-SPEC. Bulk fuel, combustible liquids, all of those sorts of things is likely to be the first asset class to be included in the new specification. There will not be any cost to this specification. The intention is that it's like a companion document, a complementary document, that we don't see that there's a lot of asset classes at the moment that would fit in there, but rather than try to shoehorn something in there, then we'll put it into A-SPEC. Similarly, solar farms. This one gives you an example of Park Solar Farm. And again, you've got buildings, you've got car parks, which are covered by the specs. What we don't have is solar farms. We have on the drawing board that we will develop an energy spec. If that is the case, then solar farms will fit into that particular spec. So they're the 3 examples that we're looking at currently. Stephen Elliott, I think I fixed up the email. Thank you for sending it through. Stephen's from Bass Coast Shire, and he identified that we had an incorrect email for him for his organisation at Bass Coast. The intention of this is to provide a dedicated email address where A-SPEC queries can be made direct to the asset owner. We're requesting that asset owners provide us an email address that is not a generic info@ email address, but an email address that will land with the asset owners or the people dealing with the asset data. And that way, if consultants or contractors have particular inquiries, they can go directly to them. This is an ongoing task for us, and eventually this will be made available on the A-SPEC website. So we will put it on their website shortly, but more importantly is on the right-hand side, so that you can see which specifications the organisation subscribes to, because that to me is the most critical thing. We're getting inquiries on a weekly basis about what specifications does this particular council or authority have, and so we want to save you having to contact us to get that query answered. So that will be on next week. A-SPEC, 2 more community presentations. we're yet to confirm our second presentation, but our first presentation will be from Brendan McDonald, who's from One & Water, and he'll be taking us through a number of areas that One & Water is interested in. But just as interesting is that Brendan was previously working at Warrnambool City Council, so I've also asked him to talk about what was involved in putting a regional initiative together. So we have a couple of regional initiatives, one with One & Water and Warrnambool City Council, another one with Colaban Water and Bendigo City Council, and there's links between them because they chat about their engagement with industry and the kind of tools that they make available. So Brendan is a wealth of knowledge, and if you're looking at, I know that you may not be interested in A-SPEC, but if you're looking at more regional initiatives and how they came about, then this would be a good presentation to come to. Oh, look at that. Just before I finish, I've got one more thing that I wanted to show you. So we talk about sample data a lot, and I want to show you what you can expect to receive. So I've just opened up QGIS in here. This is just a particular area that we've got. Now, when I show all of these layers, the sample data is essentially going to be made up of real data and associated attributes. So if you are looking to start setting up your own environments, then you can start using this kind of, the sample data will have all of the attributes in there. It will have values in there. It will have appropriate default values, etc., etc. So irrespective of what particular asset type it is, you will find it in the sample data with the correct structure. Now, I'll just put a caveat on it. We are human and errors do occur, and it was identified last week that we had created an error. So don't hesitate to let us know. We're not precious about that. The whole intention is that we have this data available for you to be able to use it. And that will be for every data set. Our next forum is next week. So we're in the last 3 weeks, and we have two of our colleagues, Kelly and Gabby, who are going on holidays. So this is their farewell appearance, because they won't be back to be at the last 3 events. So they've got an excellent MC lined up for the next 3 events. Me. So I know it's a bit funny, but we can't be too serious about these things. So I'll endeavour to be as jovial and as witty as Kelly, and I won't be doing technical presentations. Gabby is looking at how we can probably provide some technical presentations through videoing them, and that way we can maintain our tech talk to go from there. Now, people, there's been a few questions about access to videos. I've received a couple of emails today to say I can't make it, but will the video be available? Yes, it will be available. The B and D spec videos have just been finalised, so you'll probably be receiving a message shortly, which will go out to everybody that is registered for the different forums and also to our broader database, which will give you a link to the A-SPEC YouTube channel. You can then have a look at not just this year's videos, but the last couple of years' videos as well. And and that way you can also recap on some of the questions that were asked and how they were answered and whether we answered them well or not. So on that note, we're going to give you back 5 minutes of your day. Thank you very much for your attendance today. It's been great. The questions, as always, are really to us what brings these presentations relevance. Jess, thank you very much for the time that you've taken to put your presentation together and just the clarity in what you presented. And Ryan, we've thanked him as well. And everybody else, thank you again for setting aside the time. We may or may not see you next week. If we do, look forward to saying hello to you. If not, we will be in communication with you so you can access different kinds of materials that you need. I'll be on here until 12:15. If anybody wants to stay on and have any other questions. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you again.